What's up? Welcome to a bit of a different ramble here. This ramble is based on viewer requests because I'm only doing half of it right now. The request was to talk about Space Marine power armor marks as well as different bolt gun variants. I have an idea of how to address the bolt guns in a different video. So in this one I'm just going to do an at-a-glance style on the different marks of power armor, and there's 8 marks to go over, so I'm going to be very kind of glancing at these 8 marks because that's a lot to talk about in one video. I'm just going over the basic production marks. I'm not going over any Legion or chapter specific variants. I'm not going over Terminator armor or Artificer armor or anything like that. Just Space Marine Mark 1 through Mark 8 power armor productions. And it's going to be pretty basic stuff. It's really just for fluff reasons, right? Because when you're playing 40k, tactical squads have a 3+ armor save. It's in their stat line. Doesn't matter if it's Mark 2 or Mark 8 armor. So it doesn't matter there. In the Deathwatch RPG, there are optional rules to give some additional quirks, positive and negative, based on the mark design that the characters are wearing. So there it kind of would matter, but still just a little quirk thing to add some extra spice to the game. So really a lot of this stuff is just fluff, if you will. So with that in mind, I'm also not able to really hone in with the software I'm using, the image to the audio. I'm going to be talking about it in chronological order, and the image will be in chronological, if I could speak, order. So just follow chronologically, I guess, and you should be okay. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get started. Mark 1, Thunder Armor, primarily worn by the Thunder Warriors, which were Proto-Space Marines, during the conquest of Terra in the name of the Emperor. Very primitive powered armor design. In some bits of fluff, it's labeled as partially powered, meaning the legs were not powered by the armor's backpack, only the torso and arms were. The rest were just armored up. The suit was really primitive in the design. It was designed for close quarters combat, so it was designed to take a hit and dish out damage, and that's really it. No life support systems, no neural link, basically no nothing that we associate with Space Marine power armor. It's not a sealed environment, so it has those setbacks as well. But it got the job done. And once that job was done, the suit was abandoned. And as a result, very few examples of Mark 1 exist in the 41st millennium, and any examples of this Thunder armor that do exist are maintained for ceremonial purposes only. They're not used in battle, according to the fluff, anymore. So, do with that what you will. However, when it was abandoned, Mark II was put into design and put into manufacture. Mark II was known as Crusade armor, and still is known as Crusade armor, and that's because it was designed with the Great Crusade in mind. And this is the first true-on 100% powered armored suit for Space Marines. Fully armored up, fully plated essentially, fully sealed, a fully sealed environment for vacuums and hazardous situations, and fully powered throughout the entire suit. It has all the bells and whistles that we associate with Space Marine power armor. Whatever you read about in a novel that has Space Marines with Mark 7 power armor, for example, in it, whatever you read in the codices for Space Marines in the 41st millennium, all started in essence truly with the Mark II in terms of a mass-produced suit. And as a result, Mark II has all the same bells and whistles. It just might be not as efficient or not as lightweight or anything like that, but really, from this point out, aside from visual design cues and some improvements made to certain aspects, the suits are, in essence, at their core, the same. Still do the same thing with the same neural link, the same life support idea, the same medical dispensing, the same box capability, the same sensor capability, well, the same sensor design or concept, I should say. It just might be more advanced, more efficient, more redundant, lighter weight. So from here on out, I'm just going to be touching upon the different marks and why they were designed and so on and so forth. So with that said, Mark II was the only mark in use at the beginning of the Great Crusade, the only mark Space Marines had to fight in. And Mark II and Mark III had a bit of an interesting quirk that I'm glad has kind of just been swept under the rug, and that is that the helmet was fastened to the torso and therefore couldn't move independently. That has, if you look at modern artwork and modern miniature designs by Forge World, that has been kind of just swept under the rug and not factored in, thankfully, because it lets us have cool designs and cool poses. So I just want to bring that up, but it doesn't seem to be a factor anymore. So with that said, early on in the Great Crusade, Mark III, known as Iron Armor, was developed, not as a replacement Mark, but to supplement Mark II. It was designed for zone mortalis type of situations, boarding enemy vessels, fighting in tunnels, that sort of thing. The front half of the armor is bulkier, it's heavier, it's thicker armor. It is armored up in the front half. So the armor weighs more, it's not as efficient power-wise, it uses more energy because it weighs more, but that's for protection, for facing the enemy head-on in zone mortalis situations. That's what Mark III was designed for. It had a redesigned helmet that A, looked more menacing, and B, offered better protection. And never replaced the Mark II in any Legion's armory. It was just used for specific situations, and that's what it was designed for, those specific style of situations. It's also pretty good for void warfare because they could harden it easier and deal with that. As a result, it saw, I don't want to say limited use, but it definitely saw specified use during the Great Crusade. And even though Mark III was developed for a specific use and it's old as well as Mark II, both of these marks are in use in the 41st millennium still, in small numbers. They're rare and given due reverence for their age, but they're still used by Space Marine chapters, which is kind of cool. So, with that said, Mark IV was the first true replacement Mark design. Known as the Maximus suit or the Imperial Maximus suit, Mark IV was designed to be, at the time, the pinnacle of Space Marine POW armor. It had a radically redesigned shoulder pad concept, torso, and helmet design, the first helmet that could be truly separate from the torso, although we know that's not the case anymore. Mark IV truly looked like what the more modern marks of POW armor would be in 40k. And all around an improvement. Better protection at lighter weight. And everything else just updated and improved. So that's Mark IV in a nutshell. It's still capable of being produced by certain Space Marine chapters. There are a few Space Marine chapters that can make Mark IV, brand new suits of Mark IV, and do so and use it extensively. So it's a testament to the Mark IV design that it's still produced and used. Pretty good design. So this came to be in the late stages of the Great Crusade, towards the end of the Great Crusade. The Horus Heresy really gummed up the works in terms of Mark IV distribution. And as a result, we have the Mark V that we know about now, known as Heresy armor. Mark V is known as Heresy armor because it was produced during the Heresy, and it's not produced at any real official capacity. It's a hodgepodge, scavenged together, stopgap style of POW armor design. The only advancement made is the helmet sensors were a bit more advanced because they took sensors from the Terminator armor project, you could say, and they incorporated into the POW armor. Outside of that, it's actually considered on the whole to be an inferior suit of POW armor in comparison to Mark IV. Not by leaps and bounds, but just in comparison, it's considered to be lesser. It has studded or riveted, whatever you want to call it, shoulder pads and leg pieces and basically a lot of the armor, because that's what they did to reinforce the armor to give it similar protective qualities to the Mark IV using inferior materials. This is because supply lines on both sides were a mess. So they did what they had to do to keep their armor up and running. So that Mark V you're looking at could have one time been a Mark III or a Mark II or a Mark IV chassis, if you will, that had to be stripped down of all its worn out and broken components and then armored up again using components from multiple different marks as best they could, salvaged together, and then armored up. So because of that, when Mark VI came into production, which would have been Mark V, this Heresy armor was given the mark of 5 to kind of just help organize the different Space Marine POW armor therein. But it was never an official design, if that makes any sense. It's got an official designation for an unofficial design, is the best way to put it. So that's Heresy armor. Moving on to Mark VI POW armor, known as Corvus armor, in honor of the Raven Guard Primarch. The Raven Guard were instrumental in the design of the Mark VI. They field tested it exclusively and extensively, and for that reason, as well as their sacrifices during the Drop Site Massacre and their drive to rapidly rebuild, the Mark 6 power armor was named in honor of their Primarch and given to Raven Guard first and foremost to rebuild with. So they field tested it extensively. This probably would have been known as Mark 5 if it wasn't for the heresy. And it's an improvement to the Mark 4. It basically offers the same protective qualities as the Mark 4, but it has more redundant systems with no added weight. So it has more efficient systems in it, lighter weight systems, more redundant systems. Basically, overall, an improvement to power armor design. And this is the latest and greatest mark of power armor in use during the heresy. This is what was present, amongst other marks, of course, but this was present at the Defense of Terra. This was the suit of armor being distributed when Horus was defeated. Now, Chaos had Mark 6 as well because the Traitor forces were able to capture some designs and then from there build it themselves. But it was really intended to be just a loyalist suit because it was developed by the Imperium during the heresy. Probably put into development beforehand a little bit, but really got its green light and its production started during the heresy. So that's Mark 6 power armor. Sleeker design, different helmet design obviously, and a bit more advanced sensors on top of having redundant stuff. From there we have the first of the post-heresy power armors, and this is Mark 7, known as the Aquila or the Eagle armor. Now technically this was in design during the late stages of the Horus heresy, but for ease, it's just considered post-heresy armor and not used to collect a heresy-era force at all. It is a improvement on the Mark 6 design a bit. It has a different design torso, different design helmet of course, but shares a lot in common with Mark 6. And they're so similar, the two marks, that parts from one can be used to repair the other, which means maintaining these two different marks is actually very easy for Space Marines to do in the field, so that's kind of a cool bit of fluff there. It rerouted some power cablings and armored up some other power cablings a bit more effectively and so on, just basic improvements thereof. So this is post-heresy armor, but it came into being, as I mentioned, right at the end of the Horus heresy in terms of being distributed and whatnot. So we had 10,000 years without any real improvement to the Space Marine power armor marks, unfortunately. I find it a bit odd. We had how many marks during the, we had like 5 marks, you could say, during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy time period, but only 1.5 really post-heresy. And that brings me to Mark 8. I don't know when Mark 8 started being produced, but it's only ever been produced in limited numbers, so it's not produced that much. And it's called the Errant armor, Mark 8 Errant armor. It's really highly modified Mark 7. It's got an armored collar to protect the neck, and it has armor plating put in certain places to help protect vulnerable spots of Mark 7. And some other type of improvements to its design. We don't know too much on the specifics of Mark 8. I don't know when it came into being. The way in which you can read up about it, it makes it sound like perhaps it came into being in the 41st millennium and we had basically just 10,000 years of no improvements to power armor, which is also kind of weird. So I don't really know. It could have been somewhere between the 32nd millennium to the 41st millennium. My guess is to the later stages, probably towards the 41st millennium time period, if not a little bit earlier than that, because it's rare. It's only produced limitedly. I would almost imagine it kind of being like a custom order deal, in essence, the way it kind of is produced in limited numbers. But overall, it does offer improvements to the Mark 7, and maybe if the fluff ever is continued forward, Mark 8 would become the new standard. Who knows? But anyways, that's Mark 8 Errant power armor. And that's all the marks, so I know I kind of blazed through some of them, but really everything that I said about Mark 2 was present in all the other marks, like I mentioned, just improvements in one way or another. And of course visually as well, being different. Anyways, that's it for the Space Marine power armor marks. Thanks for sticking through it. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Like I said, it's more just a little fluff at a glance ramble just for the fun of it. Doesn't really impact how the game works at all or anything like that. Anyways, thanks for sticking through it. Any questions, comments, or requests, leave it in the comment section. And until next time, take it easy.